Around 370 million years ago, in the warm coastal waters of the Devonian period, an unsuspecting fish set off on an incredible journey. Emerging from beneath the water's surface, it ventured onto land. Over the millions of years that followed, its descendants gradually evolved for life on land, becoming the first amphibians. But this transition was not exactly easy. On land, they had to face challenges they had never encountered in the ocean. So how exactly did fish take over the land, and why did they leave the water in the first place? Well, the story goes back a long way to the very appearance of fish themselves, and the oldest in the fossil record found so far dates to around 518 million years ago, all the way back in the Cambrian period. This animal is known as Hycoichthys, and although it's nothing like any fish we know today, it's one of the most important fossils ever discovered. But despite their early appearance in the ancient oceans, it would take at least another 100 million years past the Ordovician and Silurian to the Devonian before they became widespread. Now, just like how the Mesozoic is nicknamed the Age of Reptiles, the Devonian is often referred to as the Age of Fish, because this period marked the explosive diversification of all kinds of fish, including the first jawed animals, the placoderms. This single adaptation is perhaps one of the most significant in the history of life on Earth. The effects of this can be seen by looking at trilobites, because around this time many died out, with the ones that survived being covered in armor or adapted for speed. And just before this major evolutionary change was about to take place, another had just finished. Plants had conquered the previously desolate continents. This event didn't just have implications for the land, but the entire world. Because as plants decomposed, all of their nutrients once locked in the ground washed into the oceans. These nutrients were soon absorbed by microorganisms until they made their way up the food chain to fish. But before fish could invade the land, they first needed to figure out how to breathe air, and it turned out to be a very difficult adaptation to get. Which is why the first lungs didn't evolve for what you might think. Living in the Devonian's oceans was no easy task for fish. To avoid being eaten, they needed heavy scales. But this of course weighed them down, meaning they needed to expend a huge amount of energy to control their buoyancy. To combat this, around 420 million years ago, fish began to develop a gas-filled bladder that sat atop their digestive system. This organ, commonly known as a swim bladder, allowed them to balance out the weight of their defenses, as well as control their buoyancy without using much energy. As it continued to become more and more advanced, in some lineages it became a fully fledged lung, such as in the creatively named lungfish. Even with lungs, they weren't quite ready to leave the water. They were missing 3 key adaptations. Without them, survival on land was impossible. The first was a carbon dioxide detection system, because contrary to popular belief, your body doesn't breathe when it needs more oxygen, it breathes when it detects too much carbon dioxide. Secondly, they evolved a fluid known as surfactant in their lungs. For you and I, this helps gases move in and out more efficiently. But because entirely aquatic fish also have it, it's more than likely that it serves a completely different function. The third and final adaptation was the act of breathing itself. And because we see this in very primitive fishes like lampreys, it was likely the first to evolve. But moving on to land wasn't just about breathing. These early pioneers still had one major limitation: they were built for swimming, not walking. And a fossil uncovered in 1993 in China's Yunnan province gives us a few clues as to how they made the transition. At only the length of your thumb, the animal known as Canichthys was perhaps the first to breathe through its nostrils. This puts it at the base of a clade known as Tetrapodomorpha. And even though we don't know what this fish was using its nostrils for, it's clear that Canichthys and its relatives were very successful. They quickly established themselves in brackish estuaries and large waterways, becoming one of the most common kinds of fish throughout much of the Devonian. And they weren't just abundant but giant. Some like Rhizodus were truly enormous, growing up to 7 meters in length. One branch of these fish, known as Alpistocegalia, often called the fishopods, became specialized to the shallows. Here they developed flat bodies and lost most of their fins. Eventually, those fins that fishopods had started to become stronger, allowing them to cling onto rotting plants whilst waiting in ambush. But they weren't tetrapods quite yet, as they neither had front limbs that bend forward from the elbow, nor back limbs that bend back from the knee. Although we don't have many fossils from this time, What we do know is that these animals were incapable of swallowing prey on land, and so because of this it's assumed that they began occasionally hunting on land before dragging their prey into the water, where the hydrodynamic forces would force food down their esophagus. Originally, the general consensus among paleontologists was that tetrapods evolved near the end of the Devonian, and soon after became terrestrial. However, 395 million years ago, in what is now Poland, a mysterious creature left footprints in the mud. Discovered in 2010, they date to the mid-Devonian. The positioning of the tracks themselves suggests the animal that left them was capable of thrusting its arms and legs forward, and is thus the oldest known tetrapod. In its time, the environment it lived in was a vast tidal flat. Stalking this seemingly barren habitat, it would have preyed upon any marine creatures who had become washed ashore. However, just after the first tetrapods colonized land, destruction hit. The end of the Devonian period brought with it a severe extinction, wiping out 50% of all genera on Earth. It also marked the disappearance of tetrapods from the fossil record for 15 million years, a time known as Romer's Gap. Unfortunately, this means that the transition to fully terrestrial animals remains blurry, because when they reappeared they had changed drastically. So what caused the most mysterious gap in the fossil record? Well, it was likely because either the conditions for fossilization were not present, or because simply paleontologists haven't been looking in the right areas. After all, since the gap was identified, a few tetrapods have been found from during the time. By the time the gap ended, tetrapods had already made it around the world, indicating that they were very successful. And one reason for their success was likely their size. They were much bigger than any creature on land, meaning that these early pioneers had plenty of available food. Their appearance on the world stage ushered in the Carboniferous, often called the Age of Amphibians, although they were still having to deal with two major challenges. The first was gravity, whose effects are much weaker in the water. It was only after many millions of years of evolution that they figured out how to walk without falling over. The second problem was hearing. Because sound travels differently in water, when they left the ocean they had to develop specialized ears to detect noise above the surface. The importance of the transition to air-breathing amphibians in the scope of evolution cannot be understated. There is a reason why animals have only conquered land on 2 occasions. By about 340 million years ago, they had radiated into various branches, with the Carboniferous marking the appearance of the very first reptiles whose eggs could survive on land. However, this flourishing of life yet again came to a tragic end. During the warm and humid Carboniferous, rainforests spanned across much of the planet, but suddenly, around 307 million years ago, began an extinction event known as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. As the cooler and more arid environment spread across the globe, the amphibians who needed wet environments to raise their young dwindled. However, the extinction wasn't all bad. It gave another group of tetrapods a chance to thrive, the amniotes. This group of animals can lay eggs that survive on land, unlike amphibians, and also have waterproof skin, which helps them live in arid environments without drying up themselves. By the Jurassic, amniotes had evolved into turtles, crocodiles, birds, lizards, mammals, and many other groups which have since come and gone. Since then they have remained by far the most dominant animals on Earth, bending the planet to their will. So what group of animals will be next to dominate the planet? Will we see the rise of intelligent terrestrial cephalopods, or will starfish take over land? Well, unfortunately, you and I will never know, but we can look to the past. And one of the most amazing evolutionary stories is that from dinosaurs into birds. Watch this video to find out more.